I worked through the darkness, my fingers moving rhythmically as dawn approached. Every movement of the needle carried weight, a fragment of memory, a whispered vow. The clock's persistent ticking kept me company until sunrise, each second a reminder of my existence slowly coming undone. As I completed the final stitch, morning light filtered through the glass and fell upon the ivory fabric. The result was stunning. It lacked the glamour of expensive boutique gowns or designer labels, but it held something far more precious, the devotion of a mother who still trusted that unconditional love could mend anything, even after years of giving. With shaking arms, I wrapped the gown in worn linen to shield it from harm. Arriving at my daughter Maya's apartment, I found her surrounded by friends, their laughter filling the air as they drank from delicate china. She resembled those untouchable celebrities you see in magazines. Pride swelled in my chest for a brief moment, then everything shattered. Maya's eyes swept over me, head to toe. "Is that it?" she asked flatly. Smiling hopefully, I unwrapped the package with the care one shows buried treasure. She barely glanced at it before her face twisted. "This looks like charity shop clearance," she announced. Her companion snickered quietly. Before I could process what was happening, she grabbed the gown and flung it toward the wastebasket. "I refuse to walk down the aisle looking like someone's cleaning woman, Mother." The oxygen seemed to leave the room. No words came. I simply collected what remained of my dignity and departed before anyone noticed the tears beginning to form. The walk home blurred into a fog of pain. Sunshine beat down mercilessly. Yet I felt frozen inside. That gown haunted my thoughts, every stitch burning like a fresh injury. I reflected on the countless sleepless nights, the decades at my inherited sewing machine, the rough skin of my palms, all I'd surrendered so Maya could climb to where she stood now. When had love transformed into something shameful? Back home, I sat facing my machine for what felt like hours. Its familiar hum, once comforting, now sounded mournful. My hand touched the foot pedal, seeking solace in its vibration, and I felt something unexpected stirring. Not grief exactly, something colder, more calculated, the kind of stillness that arrives when a heart fractures but refuses to collapse, when it begins planning instead. Days drifted past without a single call from Maya, not even a brief apology. Through neighborhood gossip, I learned her designer gown had arrived from Milan, flawless and expensive, exactly as she wanted. But perfection lacks spirit, and that dress, regardless of its beauty, could never carry her true history. One quiet afternoon, I visited her residence. After confirming she'd left, I slipped inside soundlessly. The fragrance of costly perfume and fresh blooms hung heavy. But in the corner sat that wastebasket. Inside, beneath crumpled documents and fabric remnants, lay my creation. Wrinkled, marked, degraded, yet intact, just like me. Gently, I retrieved it, pressed it against my heart, and brought it home. Spreading it across my work surface, I examined it under the fading daylight. Even in its damaged state, it possessed beauty, like a mother who continues loving despite being wounded. My fingers traced the seams, feeling my devotion still breathing within each thread. Then, clarity struck. This gown wouldn't end its days in refuse. Throughout the following nights, I isolated myself in my workspace. Sleep became optional. Food seemed unnecessary. I simply sewed. Crystal blooms were embroidered along the bottom edge. Vintage lace was carefully added. Within each layer, I concealed more than mere decoration. I embedded my journey. One stitch for each tear shed, one thread for each sacrifice made, one flower for each day spent feeling invisible. As the gown underwent its transformation, so did I. No longer the submissive mother who accepted contempt in silence, I became a woman who recognized that genuine love doesn't mean tolerating everything. It means choosing what deserves preservation. When completed, my reflection revealed someone altered. My gaze held not sorrow but conviction. The gown shimmered beneath the lamp,
its radiance containing something beyond aesthetics. It held accountability. The wedding date arrived. Initially, I hadn't intended to attend, but something, perhaps fate, perhaps self-worth, pulled me forward. I wore my modest beige dress, arranged my hair neatly, and stepped outside with determined strides. Each footfall marked a renewed heartbeat. Every breath became a quiet proclamation. I am transformed. But what would happen when this transformed mother stepped into that wedding hall? The gown now sparkled with more than just crystals. It carried secrets that would change everything. The night of reckoning was just beginning.
Reaching the Grand Oleander Ballroom, I found myself surrounded by music and celebration. Lights dancing, flowers blooming, champagne glasses clinking in toast. Maya stood radiant in her imported lace creation. Beautiful, certainly, but hollow. She didn't notice my entrance, which suited me perfectly. I remained by the entrance, watching silently. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the gravity of what approached. Tonight, my daughter would receive more than a wedding celebration. She would receive a lesson. As the clock chimed 10, I moved toward the room's center. Conversations hushed. Every face turned. Maya looked up, her smile evaporating. In that instant, I understood. Destiny had been preparing me for this moment throughout my entire existence. Because sometimes, maternal love demonstrates itself not through tears, but through a gown that outshines shame. Needles have been my constant companions since childhood. At 12, when my mother first showed me how to attach a button, I knew this would become my voice to the world. Words never came easily, but my hands spoke volumes. Through decades of thread, fabric, and silence, I learned that every seam contains stories, entire lives even. When widowhood found me, Maya was merely 6. My husband David died in a workplace accident, leaving me suddenly alone with a small child and a sewing machine. I remember weeping by the window that night, but the following morning, I powered on the machine, dried my eyes, and began stitching. From that point forward, every garment leaving my hands carried a silent promise. My daughter would never know hunger. Our tiny apartment behind the neighborhood tailor shop became our world. Maya slept on a small cot, surrounded by fabric scraps she'd fashioned into makeshift dolls. Watching her play, I believed this sacrifice would eventually hold meaning, that someday she'd understand love can be stitched into existence. Years passed, with my fingers bleeding over strangers' wedding materials, silk gowns, imported lace, the dreams of women who could afford what I couldn't. While sewing veils for others, I'd imagine my own daughter's wedding day. I envisioned creating her the world's most beautiful gown, not because of perfection, but because it would be crafted with the one thing I possessed abundantly: love. Little did I know that this dream would one day become my greatest heartbreak and ultimately my most powerful transformation. The foundation of a mother's sacrifice runs deeper than anyone imagines. When Maya reached 15, I managed to purchase her first brand new dress. Not secondhand, not repaired, but new. Sky blue with a white ribbon I'd embroidered on the chest. Watching her dance that evening, I felt vindicated. She embraced me tightly, whispering, "You're the greatest mom ever." That phrase embedded itself in my memory. I couldn't have known those identical words would later echo like a broken promise. Maya matured, and gradually she distanced herself from our humble origins. College in the city became possible through a small business loan I secured by selling my aging vehicle. She worked diligently, advanced professionally, encountered different circles. Upon returning, she'd become a stranger. Her voice had changed, her gaze too. She no longer called me mama, but mother. Each time I spoke, I detected a mixture of irritation and embarrassment crossing her features. Initially, I dismissed it as imagination,
But evidence accumulated, unreturned calls, increasingly brief visits, then that comment delivered without eye contact, "I wish you'd had educational opportunities." That statement pierced me like a needle, because unknowingly, she was declaring my love insufficient. That my hands, the very hands that stitched her childhood together, no longer held value in her world. Still, when she announced her engagement, I experienced pure, innocent happiness. Finally, I could present the gift I dreamed of for years, her wedding gown. I offered to create it personally, and though she hesitated, she eventually agreed. I interpreted this as reconciliation, a chance to repair what distance had damaged. That night, sitting before the machine, I prayed before beginning. Guide my hands. Let each stitch become a blessing. I spent days selecting affordable fabrics, ivory lace, gentle tulle, small pearls a client had left his payment. Every thread carried hopes. Every fold concealed tears. Inside the lining, invisible to others, I stitched a fragment of my own wedding dress. My wordless way of saying, "Carry me with you, daughter. Even if you no longer see me, I'll remain." But when everything was complete and she rejected it, the trash bin received more than fabric. It received my history, my love, the invisible thread still connecting us. That rejection should have broken me. Instead, it awakened something I'd buried for too long. The understanding that love given freely doesn't require acceptance, but it does demand respect. What I did next would teach both of us that lesson.
That sleepless night, I sat watching the powered-down machine, thinking of my mother and how she too had sewn herself to exhaustion. Her words returned. "Daughter, women like us don't wield swords or fortunes. Our strength lives in our hands." Understanding dawned. My strength wasn't found in acceptance, but in continuing to weave my own destiny, even when others unraveled it repeatedly. I touched that stained fabric retrieved from the waste bin again. My fingers traced broken seams, feeling my love still pulsing within. I recalled all the times I'd offered embraces that went unreturned, the uncomfortable silences, the "Mother, please don't dress like that" moments. I understood that humiliation, when sown with patience, could also teach lessons, because pain doesn't destroy, it transforms. That transformation had already begun. In following days, something shifted within me. I began sewing not for her, but for myself. Each stitch became healing. The thread moved smoothly, as if the machine understood my soul. I was no longer embroidering a gown. I was embroidering my liberation. Though Maya remained unaware, I'd formed a plan. On her wedding day, she'd wear her chosen dress, but everyone would remember the one she'd scorned. The wedding morning arrived beneath gray skies. No rain fell, but the air carried storm warnings, as if the universe sensed something was about to break. I dressed in my only decent outfit, the same worn to my mother's funeral, and carefully styled my hair. Not for others' approval, but because today I'd confront my past with dignity intact. The restored gown went into a white linen bag, folded with precision of someone guarding secrets. Neither gift nor complaint. It was a response, a silent answer to a daughter who'd forgotten the meaning of shameless love. Leaving home, strong winds blew. I walked to the bus stop, hands clutching that bag like my own heart. The journey to the venue stretched long, and with every road curve, memories surfaced. When my daughter and I shared one soul, when laughter came freely, when she embraced me without fear of being seen. But those memories now hurt worse than needles. The grand ballroom awaited, filled with lights and false smiles. What happened when I walked through those doors carrying that transformed gown would change not just my daughter's wedding, it would rewrite our entire relationship. The wedding venue was massive. Gilded columns, impossibly high ceilings, white lights, exotic blooms, sparkling glasses on tables. Everything was perfect. Perfect and empty. I paused at the entrance, observing people laughing, toasting, photographing. Maya stood at the center, gleaming in her new dress, a gown that, despite its cost, couldn't mask the coldness in her expression. Seeing me, her smile froze. I moved toward her, but before reaching her, a woman, presumably the groom's mother, approached, blocking my path with a strained smile. "You must be Maya's mother." I nodded. "Lovely to meet you," she said, though clearly insincere. "Could you wait over there? We're starting family photographs shortly." Her judgmental gaze swept over me, carrying weight heavier than words, the same judgment I'd silently endured countless times. I obeyed, stayed at the back, near curtains, like a ghost at my own bloodline's celebration. During the ceremony, nobody spoke to me. Some offered polite greetings, others simply ignored my presence. Maya didn't introduce me. I wasn't her mother that day. I was merely an inconvenient memory she preferred hidden. Music began. The couple danced. The room erupted in applause. I clapped too, but my hands trembled. Not from emotion, but contained fury. I watched my daughter embrace her new husband, so confident, so arrogant, as if life finally belonged entirely to her. For a moment, I wondered if she'd forgotten who supported her when life tried to break her, who taught her to rise, who sewed her first dress, who exchanged tears for hope. Then I knew she hadn't forgotten. She'd only denied it, because sometimes love hurts so profoundly that you prefer burying it rather than accepting it. One bridesmaid approached with an awkward smile. "Can I get you anything?" "I'm just observing." "Observing what?" "How a mother gets forgotten." The young woman lowered her gaze, speechless. I smiled calmly. No anger colored my voice, only ancient, deep sadness, no longer seeking blame. At midnight, when guests danced and music covered conversations, I rose and walked toward the ballroom center. The gown was in my hands. Eyes turned one by one until murmuring ceased. What happened next would become the talk of the town for years. The gown I carried wasn't just fabric and thread, it was truth itself, about to shine brighter than any expensive designer creation ever could. Maya turned, confused, color draining from her face. "What are you doing, Mother?" she whispered nervously. "Please sit down." "I only came to return something that belongs to me," I said, displaying the white bag. Murmuring intensified. Some laughed nervously. Others froze in place. I opened the bag delicately and removed the dress, the same one she'd called charity shop clearance. But it was no longer the same. It gleamed. Ballroom lights reflected off tiny stones I'd embroidered individually, and the restored lace appeared angel-woven. This was a gown worthy of royalty. Silence became absolute. Maya stepped backward, eyes flooding with tears. For the first time in years. Not my fault. "What is this?" she whispered, trembling. "Your dress, daughter. The one you rejected. But look at it now. It's beautiful." "Yes," I said calmly. "I transformed it just as I transformed myself. You discarded it, but I didn't, because some things a mother never abandons, even when despised." The crowd held its collective breath. I raised the dress high, extending it before everyone. This dress wasn't sewn with money, but with sacrifice, with sleepless nights, with years of refusing to quit. Every thread carries my story, every stitch my name. Maya covered her face with her hands. "Mother, please stop." "No, daughter," replied I. "Stopping is what I did when I saw you feeling ashamed of me. Today I didn't come to complain. I came to remind you where you come from." Suddenly, applause started, tentative initially, then stronger. Bridesmaids, guests, even the groom's mother. Everyone was applauding. Maya fell to her knees crying. I looked at her without pride, without resentment, only with serenity I'd never known. I approached, took her face between my hands, and whispered, "There's no shame in humble beginnings. The shame is forgetting who taught you to fly." She nodded through tears. She tried embracing me, but I stepped back. "Not yet," I told her. "Not until you learn what truly loving means." I turned, holding the gown, and walked toward the exit. Through applause, each step was farewell, every glance a closing scar. But this wasn't the end of our story. It was merely the beginning of understanding. What I didn't know was that hidden within that gown
was something even more powerful than the lesson I just delivered.
Leaving the ballroom that night, gown in hand, I felt the air belonged to me again. The moon hung overhead like an ancient lantern, and party lights reflected in the lace, giving it an almost supernatural glow. I walked slowly homeward. Each step echoed on empty streets like one more stitch permanently closing the wound my daughter had left. I didn't cry. I couldn't. I'd cried so much throughout life that tonight I was dry. Only my heart ached, not from sadness, but exhaustion. Home again, I hung the gown before the mirror. It was beautiful, too beautiful for contempt. But what nobody knew, not even Maya, was that inside that gown existed something beyond thread and embroidery, a hidden truth. Weeks before the wedding, when I decided to rescue the dress from waste, I didn't just restore it, I transformed it into a silent letter. Inside the lining, between tulle and lace layers, I sewed small, handwritten notes, carefully folded paper pieces, carrying fragments of my story, her childhood, my soul. In one I wrote, "When you were born, I thought life had returned what it took away. I never imagined love could hurt when given too freely." In another, I sewed your first dress with old fabric, but hands full of hope. I didn't know you'd someday be ashamed of the love that sheltered you. And in the last one, the smallest, most secret, the thread joining a mother and daughter doesn't break. It only stretches until one learns to release. I didn't know if Maya would find those notes. I didn't know if she'd ever have courage to open the dress. But I did it anyway, because sometimes you sow words so they can blossom when silence no longer suffices. 3 days later, Maya appeared at my door, pale, eyes swollen, voice broken. "Mother, can we talk?" I stood motionless. For a second, I wanted to embrace her, but something inside told me to wait. "Of course," I replied calmly. She entered slowly, as if fearing the house would reject her too. She sat in the chair where she'd waited countless times for me to finish sewing her uniform, a dress, a life. She carried the gown in her hands, placed it on the table. Without looking at me, she said softly, "I opened it. I found your letters. Those hidden words would finally bridge the gap between us. But healing doesn't happen instantly. It happens stitch by painful stitch. What came next would test whether love truly could mend what pride had torn apart."
Silence filled with her ragged breathing. For the first time, I saw her vulnerable. She was no longer the arrogant woman from the wedding. She was my little girl again. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I didn't know how much you'd sacrificed for me." I lowered my gaze. "You didn't have to know. Mothers don't count stitches. We just sew." "I was such a fool, Mother." "No, daughter," I said. "You were human. Pride is inherited, just like eye color." Maya broke down crying. She knelt beside me, just like when she was small. She took my hands, and I felt them tremble like mine. "Forgive me." "You don't need to ask forgiveness," I said. "You need to learn." We stayed like that in silence. I didn't cry because forgiveness, when sincere, doesn't hurt. It brings relief. Maya rested her head on my lap, and for an instant I felt her childhood's weight again. The same warmth, the same fragility. After a while she looked up. "Can I stay with you for a few days?" "Of course," I replied, smiling. "But you'll have to earn your keep. Sewing, sweeping, cooking, living." That night we ate dinner together for the first time in years. The silence between us was no longer uncomfortable. It was warm, necessary. "I always thought you were weak," she said suddenly. "And now?" I asked. "Now I know you were just tired." "Yes, daughter," I replied with a smile. "Love can exhaust you too." The following weeks brought unexpected revelations. Maya stayed, learned to sew properly, and slowly our relationship mended. Then one afternoon the telephone rang. Maya answered, her face changing instantly. "It's Imani Ellington?" she murmured. Her husband's mother, the same woman who'd looked at me at the wedding as if I were hired help. After hanging up, Maya told me in a low voice, "She's coming for dinner tomorrow. She says she wants to talk to both of us." Something about that name felt familiar, something I couldn't quite place. The next evening, when Imani Ellington walked through my door, I felt the past and present colliding. As she sat at my table, she finally spoke the words I'd never expected to hear. "I suppose you don't remember me," she began carefully. "No," I said, "but my memory doesn't forget voices that wound." What she revealed next would explain so much about Maya's father, about old wounds, and about how the thread of our lives had been tangled together long before this wedding ever happened.
Imani sighed deeply, lowering her gaze. "Many years ago, I was young and arrogant. My mother had a seamstress who sewed beautifully despite charging almost nothing. I treated her with contempt, demanded miracles, made her wait hours for payment, sometimes didn't pay at all, until one day that woman disappeared. I later learned she'd been widowed with a small daughter. My hands froze. My heart skipped a beat. 'That woman was you,' Imani said, her eyes moistening. Memories flooded back. That tailor shop decades ago, her young face, her jewelry, her authoritative voice. Yes, it was her. When I saw you at the wedding, holding that dress with such dignity, I realized I'd spent my entire life silently admiring what I never possessed. True dignity." Maya looked at me, horrified. "You worked for her, mother?" "Yes, daughter. And from her words, I learned never to let myself be humiliated again." "I came to ask your forgiveness, Afia," Imani said through tears, "and to help. I want to fund a studio for you. Not to clear my conscience, but to honor what I should have honored years ago." I studied her carefully. Where I once saw an enemy, I now saw someone who, like my daughter, had lived deceived by pride. "I'll accept," I finally said, "but the studio will carry my mother's name." "What was your name?" Imani asked. "Hope, because that was the only thing I never lost." Several years have passed since then. Hope's studio thrives, filled with women learning that everything, even what seems irreparable, can be reshaped again. Maya works with me, teaching embroidery to beginners. And my granddaughter, Nia, now 10, plays with that red thread, the one her grandfather saved, the one that connects generations. Today, my hair is completely white, my hands marked with fine scars like road maps drawn by time. Each one tells a story. What I sew now aren't dresses. I sew souls. I've learned that love isn't always expressed in hugs or words. Sometimes it's expressed in the silence of one who, despite everything, keeps sewing. The deepest wounds don't open to destroy us, but so light can enter through them. And I've discovered there's no firmer stitch than that of a woman who has cried, because one who has cried knows how to hold the needle with love.